Welcome back, fellow hunters. Today we'll be going over the Gunlance in Monster Hunter Rise Sunbreak. Due to the introduction of Bullet Barrage in Sunbreak, most people think we just spam this ability over, and over, and over. Well, you get the point. But there's really more to Gunlance than just Bullet Barrage. Soon, you will see the other things we can do with the Gunlance that, while not quite as flashy, still pack a mean punch when hunting the local wildlife en masse.
I'll make it look like I'm losing, won't bother hiding my bruises. And when they finally think you're wounded, then it's your chance to be ruthless.
First thing you note about the Gunlance is that it looks very similar to the normal lance. You have a nice long and most of the time sharp lance to poke the monster with, and a nice bulky shield to block monster attacks. But that's pretty much where the similarities with the lance end. Gunlance is loaded with shells that, when used, cause a small explosion. You can charge the shells to do increased damage with each shell, fire them off in small quantities in between lance pokes, or have them all go off at once with what is known as a full burst. There are melee combos, as with every other melee weapon, but for the most part, your shells are your bread and butter. The Gunlance has 3 shelling types, which all have their own distinct playstyles that pair well with them. But feel free to use any playstyle you want with any type of shelling you want, as long as it makes you happy. The first shelling type is wide shelling. This is your poke, boom, poke, boom, poke, boom playstyle. You typically have very few shells, so that's typically what you're going to be doing, then reloading and repeating. Wide also has very good shell damage when it comes to your single shell explosions. While you can still full burst with wide shelling, where you have fewer shells, you typically end up doing less damage just because you're not causing as many explosions. Wide shelling is great at breaking monster parts with your mini explosions, and since you're not having to pull off a melee combo, you have more opportunities to block incoming attacks, since you're not committed to any long animations. The next shelling type, and my personal favorite, is normal shelling. This is typically your full burst playstyle, where you're typically going to be backhand slapping the monster with the lance, then slamming the lance down on the monster, followed by unloading all your shells at once. It's very satisfying when you can manage to get a few of these combos off while the monster's down, such as during a paralysis. But since you are going to be full bursting more often, you're going to want to have artillery and load shells as part of your build when playing with normal shelling. This also makes normal shelling ideal for your bullet barrage, since you have more shells in total. So not only is your wyvern fire going off, but all of your shells are hitting at the same time. The biggest drawback of full bursting is that you end up eating through your sharpness pretty fast. So you may want to have some protective polish or speed sharpening on your build as well. The last shelling type we have is long shelling. This is your most rounded playstyle that has more shells than wide, but not quite as many as normal. Most players end up doing a charged shelling playstyle while playing long shelling, which consists of charging up each shell one at a time, and after using up all your shells, reloading, and then doing it again. Now, since you're charging your shells, there will be less time to throw up your shield than if you're playing wide shelling, but less animation commitment than swinging around a huge lance. Now keep in mind that in order to have charged shelling, you'll have to give up the ability to blast dash due to it sharing a switch skill slot. So you're going to want to stick to the monster pretty well. No more hanging out in Narnia for you. Now with the 3 shelling types and the 3 main playstyles out of the way, what else is there to talk about when it comes to the Gunlance? One small bit is that even if you have an elemental weapon, you still end up doing a small amount of fire damage, as each shell does a super small amount. Most would think it's just raw damage because it's just an explosion, but when you unload a shell on one of those strange circles of creatures on the walls, what do you think happens? They change their element to fire. This only happens when these creatures are struck with an element. Another small tidbit is shelling does great part break damage. While you may not be very good at cutting off tails, breaking heads, legs, and wings will be super easy when you manage to get off some shells. You also still have some switch skills that can change up your playstyle a little bit if you feel so inclined, such as using Ground Splitter to close in on the monster a little bit and also increase the damage of your shells temporarily. But in doing so, you can't do the most satisfying ability the Gunlance has to offer. I'm talking about, of course, Bullet Barrage. Now, I know what you're thinking. I said in the beginning that there's more to Gunlance than just Bullet Barrage. But come on now, look at this, and tell me this doesn't look awesome. All kidding aside, the Gunlance is a powerhouse of a weapon when it's used in the right hands. All playstyles and shelling types are viable and fun in their own rights. If this video made you think again about whether you wanted to give Gunlance a try, please let me know in the comments below. This is by far my favorite weapon in Monster Hunter thus far, and I've put more hours into it than any other weapon aside from the Greatsword, which is the weapon that I started my Monster Hunter journey with. But Gunlance is quickly catching up. My intentions are to make this a short series about each of the weapons in Monster Hunter and the things you can do with each one, without going into a full-on guide on how to use each weapon. There are plenty of guides out there made by much more experienced hunters than me, and if you're looking for a quick guide on how to play any of the weapons that I showcase in this little series, please look into them. I actually used Rurikon's guides to help me understand the nuances of Gunlance back in Monster Hunter World, and he's very knowledgeable when it comes to all things Monster Hunter. Rage Gaming also has many useful guides that I've used in the past when I was trying to learn a new weapon. With all that being said, I hope to see you in the next one, where I'm going to be going over the Charge Blade. And until next time, fellow hunters, happy hunting.